I'm Pieter Linknecht from the Belgian mission here to the UN and the WTO. Now, pretty much unsurprisingly, I guess, my question will be on the choice for the guidance standard. It comes out of most of the presentations we heard here as apparently an obvious choice in favor of guidance and against certification. But my question would be, was there any reasoning behind it, and would it be mostly in terms of principles or in terms of implementation and implementability of certification in this area? Now, when we talk about this area, indeed there were a few terminology issues being raised. I find it also interesting that what is called social responsibility in English for the standard is called responsabilité sociétale in French, which seems to be broader than the classical social responsibility issue. And when coming here, I was actually expecting an ISO standard mostly focused on labor standards. Now, as our UNCTAD colleague was pointing out, this is apparently 26,000 is probably even going beyond societal and going into the full range of sustainable development. Now, to link this back to my initial question, has it ever been considered, given this sweeping scope of this standard, and the fact, as the Secretary General mentioned, that ISO is very much intending to cover one issue or one issue with one standard, then giving all of these things, has it ever been considered to actually, instead of covering these, I thought it is 7 or 8 central issues in this standard, to take just one by one and go a little bit further in the road of compliance and control of the actual standard? So that's what it is, because when a few things have been mentioned here in terms of, for instance, Nagoya, success of last week. Well, there we see that we actually had a negotiation where compliance was at the heart of the battle and where we have now a binding outcome. That is also true for many of the standards that you refer to with partner organizations like ILO. So that's it basically. Thank you very much.
I'll start with just giving a bit of background, just in terms of the inception of this, and I think it was alluded to in Rob Steele's presentation around the study that went on in this effort. A strategic advisory group on social responsibility was formed before we even started this adventure to see what were the possibilities for ISO to get engaged in this at all. Was ISO the correct organization? Was ISO suitable for this kind of thing? Did ISO have the capabilities to address this issue? So that was very important deliberations over a period of 18 months with many, many stakeholders as well, mirroring, if you will, that kind of inclusion of where ISO had a role in this space. And I guess it speaks a little bit to the breadth of this subject. There was a view that there was indeed space for ISO to be involved with a number of conditions, and one of the conditions being that this is not intended to be yet another certification adventure, if you will. This is intended to set the stage, to be aspirational, to include all aspects of social responsibility, and to not reinvent the wheel, but to complement existing intergovernmental instruments and approaches, which is another precondition at the start of the work before it started. That was out of the hands, I would say, of the working group on social responsibility. These were the rules of engagement, saying that it shall complement these and, for example, before starting work, establish a memorandum of understanding with the International Labour Organization to understand the relationship between the instruments of the ILO and the ISO 26000 standard. So the working group on social responsibility had this set for itself. And that was a rules of engagement related to the development. So they had to play within those rules, and there were certain, I think, voices through the development process that certainly would have liked a certification standard, but that was the rules of engagement, and it was felt quite appropriate that that would be adding the most value in this space for the ISO 26000 standard. I mean, I think on the issue of compliance and other areas, perhaps Jonathan, if you have something to say in this area about.
I get the question on the compliance aspect. To be honest, I mean, there were debates around compliance and whether it should be a certifiable standard. If you're talking about your desire for it to be a certifiable standard, well, I think it's been made clear that there were various reasons as to why some felt it shouldn't be a certifiable standard. If I speak personally, I get concerned that if it is, and I'm speaking on my own person here, if it's a certifiable standard, there's a danger that it can promote a tick-box approach, and it doesn't get organizations and individuals within the organization to really ask the tough questions and to think through what the challenges of sustainable development are all about. And I really think that unless and until organizations and individuals have had those tough discussions and have really said, why is it that we need to promote social responsibility and sustainable development, then we're not going to get that level of social responsibility. And if I very briefly, an example from my country I often use is we have charters around black economic empowerment. If we have organizations that tick the box of complying with the requirements to do with black economic empowerment, my worry is that often they don't understand sort of the letter of the law. They're not actually seeking to achieve the real transformation that's required. And if they understand why it's in our collective interest to do black economic empowerment effectively, then we'll see a far greater real engagement in the issue. And I also think it's going to be really difficult. If we had set out to get a certifiable standard, to have reached the level of agreement that we've got now, I don't think we would have reached that level of agreement. But these are my personal opinions on that.
My name is Bob Bishop, and I represent the ISIS Foundation here in Geneva. I like everything I've heard this morning and congratulate the ISO team for bringing everything forward. But interesting enough, as 96,000 was under development and finalization, the world saw perhaps what has been the mother of all violations of corporate social responsibility in the banking and the financial services industries. And I'd like to know if that was taken into account during the deliberations for 96,000, or do you think the 96,000 rules apply more or less not to the financial industries? Thank you.
I think I can't talk about the standard itself because I think the standard itself is generic. I think it goes across all sectors, including the financial sector. The key thing, I think, and this is one of the things that ISO has been trying to do, is to actually reach out to engage with the financial sector and stakeholders in the financial sector to say, so what? Yeah, we've had the most significant financial recession in living memory. What can we learn from that? How could voluntary standards make a difference? And how could they actually help? And to date, I think we need to understand three things. We need to understand, firstly, that ISO develops voluntary standards in response to market need. And one of the things that we are looking at is what does the market need in terms of response around financial services and financial sectors. The issue of social responsibility, I think, is clearly an issue in this sector, absolutely clearly. And this is not just a regulatory issue. This is not just an industry issue. This is a restoration of confidence issue. And I really think that the standard, and it's a guidance standard, is there for the sector to take up or not as they see fit. The second area, I think there are specific areas in the financial sector where voluntary standards may actually assist, because I think, and this is slightly off the topic, but I think one of the key things that is a reaction to what has happened is a move to regulation and greater and heavier regulation. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily the whole or only answer. I believe some of the ethics and some of the subject areas that we're talking about in this standard, I think have huge relevance.